In certain kingdoms of the past, the habits of royalty were more than just personal quirks, they were national policy. Kings like Louis XIV of France had routines so elaborate that entire governments and households ran on their sleep schedule. Meetings, meals, and even diplomacy were timed around when His Majesty awoke. And so, while this tale is woven with whimsy, the notion that a sovereign's slumber could shift the rhythm of a whole realm is not so far-fetched after all. There was once a land nestled between hills too polite to rise too steeply and forests too sleepy to rustle. It was called the Kingdom of Muddleton, and it was famous for one thing only: King Egbert the occasionally awake. Egbert had many titles: Sovereign of Slippers, His Royal Sleepiness, and the one who fell asleep in a suit of armor. He had a flexible relationship with time. While most rulers rose with the sun, Egbert rose with maybe. He slept in bursts, unpredictable, uncontrollable, and often quite public. In Muddleton, nothing could officially happen unless the king was at least halfway conscious. The cabbage markets couldn't open. The pigeons couldn't be paid. One year spring was delayed 3 weeks because the king mistook a robin for his dream butler and tried to fire it. So the kingdom adapted. People walked softly. They whispered always. Weddings paused if Egbert nodded off. One bride waited 6 hours at the altar while the king napped in the vestry. He awoke only to declare the cake emotionally threatening. The queen, a very awake woman named Winifred, created the Bureau of Royal Slumber Affairs. Their motto: "We plan while he naps." They tracked his patterns. If he yawned at dawn, there would be fog. If he mumbled about goats, Parliament was cancelled. Knights didn't ride into battle. They rode across the countryside, announcing nap warnings. His Majesty is dozing. Hide your clogs. And somehow it worked. In the early days, the people of Muddleton tried to adjust politely. They walked softly, whispered always, and clapped by patting their knees. But it soon became clear: living under King Egbert's schedule required more than manners. It required strategy. The royal alarm boy was hired, a 12-year-old with bells tied to his elbows. He was fired 2 days later for excessive jingling. Next came the snore interpreter, who claimed he could decipher royal dreams. He once insisted Egbert had declared war on soup. Soup was banned for a month. It was a dark time. Even weddings were paused if Egbert nodded off. One bride waited 6 hours at the altar while the king napped in the vestry. He awoke only to declare the cake emotionally threatening. Eventually, Queen Winifred stepped in. A woman so alert she could predict the weather just by sniffing the hallway, Winifred created the Bureau of Royal Slumber Affairs. Their motto: "We plan while he naps." They tracked his patterns. If he yawned at dawn, there would be fog. If he mumbled about goats, Parliament was cancelled. Knights rode not into battle, but across the countryside, announcing nap warnings. His Majesty is dozing. Hide your clogs. And still, it somehow worked. While the king slumbered and the queen ruled, life in Castle Knapsworth developed its own peculiar rhythm. When your sovereign might fall asleep at any moment, creativity becomes a survival skill. The castle's servants invented a silent language of meaningful yawns. 1 yawn meant His Majesty stirs. 2 yawns meant hide the marmalade. 3 yawns meant someone had accidentally woken the royal cat, Duchess Whiskers, who was almost as temperamental about sleep as the king himself. Sir Wiggins, the chief blanket tuckmaster, had become something of a philosopher. He spent hours contemplating the perfect thread count for royal slumber. Too rough and His Majesty dreams of sandpaper, too smooth, and he slides right out of consciousness into the waking world. It was all about the delicate balance. The castle's library had been converted into a repository of quiet knowledge. Books were rebound with silk pages that wouldn't rustle. The librarian, Master Egbert, communicated entirely through interpretive eyebrow movements. He had catalogued over 2,000 ways to silently express disapproval. But perhaps most remarkably, the royal garden had been transformed into what the Queen called the landscape of eternal afternoon. Sleepy flowers bloomed in slow motion. Drowsy bees hummed lullabies to themselves. Even the grass grew at a contemplative pace, taking 3 days to rise a single inch. The gardener, old Snoozeberry, claimed he could predict the king's mood by watching how the daisies yawned. See how that one's petals droop? Just so, His Majesty will wake up craving soup and feeling suspicious about Tuesdays. One fateful evening, when the moon was particularly judgmental and the stars were gossiping among themselves, an ambassador arrived from the far kingdom of perpetual urgency. His name was Sir Hastings McRushworth, and he had never, not once in his entire life, been late for anything. Sir Hastings had traveled for 3 weeks to deliver an invitation to the royal wedding of Princess immediately to Prince right now. The ceremony was scheduled for dawn, and attendance was, according to the gold-leafed invitation, absolutely essential and completely non-negotiable. Unfortunately, Sir Hastings arrived at 11:47 p.m., just as King Egbert had settled into his evening contemplation nap, a sacred ritual that typically lasted anywhere from 3 hours to several days. The Queen met Sir Hastings in the whisper chamber, a room specially designed for conversations that might accidentally wake the king. The walls were lined with sleeping moss, and the chairs were stuffed with cloud fluff harvested during the gentlest rainstorms. "Your Majesty," Sir Hastings whispered urgently, "I must speak with the king immediately. The future of international diplomacy depends upon it." Queen Winifred smiled the patient smile of someone who had explained the situation approximately 847 times before. "I'm afraid His Majesty is currently indisposed. Perhaps you could return in, let's say, whenever he wakes up." Sir Hastings nearly fainted. In his kingdom, whenever was not a unit of time. It was barely even a concept. But the wedding, he sputtered quietly. The treaties, the ceremonial cheese wheels. "All very important, I'm sure," the Queen agreed. "Would you like some chamomile tea while we wait?" And so began the great international waiting, during which Sir Hastings learned the ancient art of patience. The Queen perfected her diplomatic yawning, and somewhere in the castle, King Egbert dreamed of flying sheep wearing tiny crowns. During the king's great slumber of summer, which lasted from June through most of August, the castle's roosters began to organize. Led by a particularly ambitious bird named General Coxworth, they formed what historians would later call the Dawn Resistance. You see, roosters have one job: to announce the morning. But in a kingdom where morning was a flexible concept, and the king might decide that 3 p.m. was dawn if he happened to wake up then, the roosters were experiencing what scholars now recognize as an existential crisis of crowing. General Coxworth called secret meetings in the royal henhouse. "Brothers," he crow whispered to his feathered followers, "we are roosters. We do not crow at the convenience of sleeping kings. We crow because the sun rises, because the world turns, because it is what roosters do." The rebellion began small, a tentative cock-a-doodle-doo at actual sunrise, quickly muffled when Master Shushbert appeared with a stern look and a handful of corn bribes. But gradually the roosters grew bolder. They developed coded crows. A short crow meant the king is dreaming of breakfast. A long crow meant the queen is handling everything as usual. And a melodic, rolling crow meant we are chickens and we refuse to live by human sleep schedules any longer. The situation came to a head during the Feast of Drowsy Saints, when General Cogsworth led a synchronized sunrise crow that accidentally woke the king, 3 neighboring kingdoms, and a dragon who had been napping in the nearby caves of convenient slumber. King Egbert emerged from his chambers, hair askew, wearing one slipper and a confused expression. "Did someone say something about breakfast?" he asked hopefully. The queen quickly declared the roosters artistically expressive and established the Royal Department of Poultry Relations. General Cogsworth was promoted to Ambassador of Dawn Affairs, a position that came with its own tiny crown and the right to crow officially once per day at whatever time felt emotionally appropriate. As autumn arrived in Muddleton, 3 weeks late because the king had to personally approve the changing of the leaves, Queen Winifred decided it was time to consult the experts. She sent word across the lands, seeking the finest sleep scholars, dream interpreters, and consciousness consultants. The responses were varied. First came Professor Morpheus Duesenberg from the University of Theoretical Slumber. He arrived carrying 17 pillows, a telescope for studying sleep patterns, and a notebook filled with diagrams of various yawning techniques. "Your Majesty," he declared importantly, "I shall solve this mystery with science." He lasted 2 days before falling asleep in his own research notes. Next came Madame Mystical Moonbeam, a self-proclaimed interpreter of subconscious kingdoms. She brought crystals that hummed, incense that sparkled, and a small potted plant that she claimed could commune with sleeping minds. "The king's dreams," she announced after consulting her crystal ball, "are being influenced by an ancient curse involving disgruntled sheep." She was politely asked to leave after she attempted an exorcism on the royal pillow. Finally came old Henrik the Sleep Whisperer, a tiny ancient man who claimed he had once helped an entire village overcome their fear of nightmares. He took one look at King Egbert, who was currently napping in a chair shaped like a giant teacup, and chuckled. "Some people are born to sleep lightly, ready to spring into action. Others are born to sleep deeply, gathering wisdom from dreams. But your king," he said, "was born to sleep creatively. He doesn't just rest, he explores consciousness like an artist explores paint." The queen raised an eyebrow. "And this is normal?" Old Henrik shrugged. "Normal is overrated. Your kingdom seems happy. Your people are well rested. And you, my dear, have learned to rule both the waking world and the sleeping one. I'd say you've mastered something quite extraordinary." Inspired by old Henrik's words, Queen Winifred decided to embrace Muddleton's unique culture rather than fight it. She declared the kingdom's first annual festival of synchronized napping, inviting neighboring lands to experience the joy of guilt-free midday slumber. The preparations were extensive. Every inn was equipped with the softest beds. Every restaurant served meals designed to induce pleasant drowsiness: warm soup, fresh bread, and something called sleepy time pie that contained a secret ingredient known only to the royal baker. It was nutmeg and love, mostly nutmeg. Street performers were hired to tell boring stories. Musicians composed lullabies in 7 different languages. Even the town crier was trained to announce events in a soothing, hypnotic whisper. The festival's crown jewel was the great communal nap, scheduled to take place in the town square at exactly 2 p.m., the traditional royal nap hour. Hundreds of visitors would lie down on specially woven grass mats and attempt to nap in perfect harmony. King Egbert was, naturally, the guest of honor. He would lead the nap by example, demonstrating proper sleeping posture and breathing techniques he had unconsciously perfected over years of professional slumber. Delegations arrived from across the continent. The ambassador from Alertia came expecting chaos, but found herself inexplicably relaxed by the 3rd day. The Prince of Productivity spent 2 hours napping in a hammock and declared it surprisingly efficient. Even Sir Hastings McRushworth returned, having developed an appreciation for strategic rest periods during his previous visit. The festival was such a success that it became an annual tradition. Muddleton's economy shifted from agriculture and trade to what the Queen called hospitality slumber, providing the world's most restful vacation experience. Years passed in Muddleton like a gentle, meandering dream. King Egbert continued to sleep creatively. Queen Winifred continued to rule practically, and the kingdom prospered in its own drowsy way. But as all stories must, this one eventually approached its natural conclusion, not with drama or conflict, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well napped. One spring morning, which occurred at 2:30 p.m., King Egbert woke up with unusual clarity. He sat up in his bed, looked around at his kingdom of soft sounds and gentle light, and smiled. "Winifred," he called to his queen, who was in the next room, probably solving 17 problems and planning 3 festivals. "I've been thinking," he said. "A dangerous hobby, my dear," she replied fondly, appearing in the doorway with a cup of tea and an expression of loving patience. "I want to write a book," the king announced, "about sleeping, about how the world looks different when you're not rushing through it, about the wisdom that comes from taking time to truly rest." The queen nearly dropped her teacup. In all their years together, Egbert had never expressed interest in writing anything longer than a grocery list. "What would you call it?" she asked. The king considered this carefully, as he considered all things. "The Art of Royal Slumber, a guide to ruling from the inside out." And so, in the kingdom that had learned to sleep around its king, the king finally learned to wake up for his kingdom, not to change it, but to celebrate it, to document its gentle wisdom, and to share with the world the revolutionary idea that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all. The book became a bestseller in 17 kingdoms and was translated into languages that had never before had words for strategic napping or therapeutic drowsiness. But that, dear listener, is a story for another very sleepy day. If you visit Muddleton today, you'll find it much as it always was. A kingdom that moves at the speed of contentment, where clocks are suggestions rather than commands, and where every afternoon at 2 p.m., the whole realm pauses for a moment of perfect synchronized peace. They say that somewhere in the castle, in a room filled with the gentlest light, King Egbert still naps occasionally, not because he has to, but because he wants to, because he has discovered that rest is not the opposite of productivity, but its most essential ingredient. And Queen Winifred, She rules still, with wisdom earned through years of turning impossible situations into improbable solutions, proving that sometimes the best way to lead is simply to let people be exactly who they are meant to be. The roosters still crow at sunrise, sunset, and whenever the mood strikes them. The sheep still graze peacefully in fields that somehow always look like they're painted in watercolors, and visitors still come from around the world to learn the ancient art of guilt-free rest. Because in the end, dear sleepy travelers, Muddleton discovered something the rest of the world had forgotten, that there is profound wisdom in moving slowly, deep intelligence in quiet moments, and revolutionary power in the simple act of allowing yourself to truly, deeply, completely rest. So, if ever you find yourself wandering along a countryside path brushed with wild thyme and moss, and the breeze smells faintly of lavender and warm bread, you might be near the place where King Egbert built his book and Queen Winifred built her peace. The original castle may have faded into memory, but the stillness remains. The stones still remember how to hold warmth. The meadows still hum the tune of distant lullabies. And somewhere in the hush between one thought and the next, a rooster crowns the moment just because it feels right. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the echo of a gentle king's voice, reminding you softly, kindly, that there is nothing more powerful than resting on purpose. Sleep well, little wanderer. May your dreams unfold slowly. May your thoughts quiet like petals in dusk. And may you always remember that even in the busiest kingdoms, it is still perfectly noble to simply nap. Sweet dreams.